She was blind, alone, and 30 miles from anyone who would hear her scream. But when the cries came through the darkness, she didn't hesitate. Her bare feet found the road as she followed a voice only she could hear. What she didn't know was that the man she was leading to safety owned half the continent, and he was about to repay her with everything he had. This is the story of Amara, a 17-year-old girl who had memorized the shape of her world through sound and touch alone. Her village had no doctor, no clinic, nothing but dust and determination. And on the day a broken-down luxury car silently stranded a stranger in the wilderness, her entire life was measured in footsteps. She would have to guide him further than she had ever traveled, through dangers she could not see, to a safety she had never known. The heat that day was a physical wall. Amara felt it press against her skin as she collected water from the well, her hands tracing the familiar roughness of the rope. She heard the village around her, the distant chatter, the goats, the rustle of dry maize, a map painted in sound. Then a new sound carved through the ordinary, not an animal, a human voice, cracked with a pain so raw it cut through the haze. She froze, her head tilting. The voice came again, weaker, a man's voice calling out in a language she didn't know, but the desperation needed no translation. It came from the east, down the lone dirt road that connected their village to nothing but more emptiness, a road no one used unless they were lost. Amara called out. No one in the village was missing. Her uncle, the headman, was tending the fields. The other women were at the market a day's walk away. She was alone with the children and the elderly. The voice called again, a broken syllable that ended in a cough. Her decision was instinct, not thought. She left her bucket and started walking. The road was a ribbon of packed earth and sharp stones under her bare feet. She moved quickly, her white cane tapping in a rapid rhythm, building a picture of the path ahead, a dip here, a rock there. The voice guided her like a beacon. After 20 minutes of fast walking, the sound stopped. She halted, listening fiercely. Only the wind. Then a shallow, ragged breath. He was just off the road in the scrub. She found him by the smell of sweat and gasoline. Her hands found him first, expensive fabric now torn and damp, a wrist with a heavy, smooth watch. He was burning up. He muttered something delirious. Car gone, water. His words were slurred, his breathing shallow. Heat stroke, dehydration. She knew the signs. But the nearest help was not behind her in the village. They had no medicine, no vehicle, not even a working phone. The closest clinic was in Denver, a town 30 miles down this very road. A journey that took 2 days by foot for a healthy person, an impossible journey for a dying man, and for a blind girl, it was suicide. Yet leaving him meant his death was certain. She knelt, feeling for his pulse, thready and fast. She had her small water gourd half full. She brought it to his lips, trickling the precious liquid into his mouth. He choked, then swallowed, a moment of clarity. "Who are you?" he whispered in broken Swahili. "Amara," she said, "I am here." He gripped her wrist, his strength surprising. "Help me." She made her choice in that grip. She would not let him die in the dust. She would get him to Denver. She told him the plan, her voice calm, masking the terror that tightened her chest. 30 miles. She had never walked more than 5 from home. She would be his eyes. He would have to be her strength. The first mile was a lesson in agony. He was tall, heavy, and weak. She positioned herself under his arm, her small frame buckling under his weight. They stumbled like a broken creature, 1 foot at a time. She navigated, calling out every step, every turn. Rock left, dip ahead, slow. He obeyed, his world reduced to her voice. By the 3rd mile, the sun was a merciless hammer. Her water was gone. His steps became shuffles, his breaths groans. They rested under the scant shadow of a thorn tree. He was fadding. She knew they wouldn't make it at this pace. She had to find a new way. Then she remembered the dry riverbed. It ran parallel to the road for several miles, its sand smoother than the rocky path. But it was a maze of gullies and had a steep entry, a dangerous shortcut. She told him, "We must go down there. It is smoother, but you must trust me." He nodded beyond words. Getting him down the bank was a slow, terrifying slide of loose earth and scraping limbs. They landed in a heap on the sandy bottom, but she was right. The going was faster. Her cane swept ahead, finding a clear path. For a few miles, hope flickered. It didn't last. The canyon walls narrowed, cutting off the breeze. The heat became an oven. His body grew heavier, his silence more frightening. She talked constantly, a stream of encouragement and direction just to keep him conscious. "We are moving, the sand is soft, you are doing well." Her own throat was parched, her feet blistered and bleeding. As dusk approached, the temperature plummeted. The dry air stole what little warmth they had. He began to shiver violently. Shock was setting in. They had covered maybe 8 miles, 22 to go. They were in the middle of nowhere, exposed, with night creatures beginning to stir. She helped him to the base of the canyon wall, a slight overhang their only shelter. She built a small windbreak of rocks by feel. He was barely coherent. In a moment of lucidity, he fumbled with his wrist, pressing the heavy watch into her hand. "Take, if I not," he gasped. She pushed it back. "You will need it to tell the time in Denver," she said, her voice firm. The refusal was not about pride. It was a contract. He would live. The night was long and cold, filled with the sounds of hyenas whooping in the distance. She didn't sleep. She listened to his breathing, ready to shake him if it grew too quiet. She thought of her mother, who had died from a fever because the clinic was too far. She would not let this stranger share that fate. Dawn came, pale and cold. He was alive but weaker. He could not stand without her full support. The realization was a stone in her stomach. They could not continue like this. They would die in this riverbed. She had one last, desperate idea. A memory from childhood, a story her grandfather told about a herder's shortcut through the hills. It was treacherous, but it cut miles off the journey. She described it to him. "It is steep, very steep, but it leads to the old road, closer to Denver." He just nodded, his eyes closed, the ascent of a man with no options. The climb out of the riverbed was a brutal, hour-long struggle. She led, finding handholds and footholds by touch, then getting his hands and feet to the same spots. Twice, he slipped, nearly pulling them both down. By the time they collapsed onto the plateau above, they were spent. But they had gained the high ground, and from here Amara heard something new, faint but unmistakable, the hum of a distant generator, a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness, civilization. It was off to the north, not directly on their path. It meant deviating from the plan, burning precious energy on a gamble. She told him, "I hear a machine, maybe a farm, maybe a water pump. There might be people, help." He didn't argue. They turned north towards the sound. For another hour, they pushed through dense, thorny scrub. The hum grew louder, becoming a steady diesel chug. Then a new sound, dogs, barking. Her heart leaped. Where there were dogs, there were people. They broke into a clearing. A low, tin-roofed building stood ahead. A small mining outpost, deserted for the season, but with a working pump for the equipment, and a locked storage shed. No people. The dogs were wild, scavenging at the edges. The hope that had flared so brightly turned to ash. The man crumpled to his knees, a dry sob escaping him. The journey had broken him. Amara stood, listening to the relentless pump. Water. There was water here. She followed the sound, her hands finding the pipes. She traced them to a spigot, locked, but at its base, a slow, constant drip. She rushed back, pulled him up, and dragged him to that precious drip. They took turns catching the droplets in their palms, then their mouths. It was a lifeline. They drank for what felt like an hour, until their bodies stopped screaming. The water revived him enough for a terrible clarity. He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. The dust caked on her skin, the bloody feet, the unseeing eyes filled with a determination that shamed his own despair. "You are blind," he whispered, not a question, a horrified realization. "Yes," she said simply. He put his head in his hands. The impossibility of it all, the sheer scale of what this child was doing, overwhelmed him. "Why?" he asked, the same question from the first day. "Why do this for a stranger?" Amara was quiet for a long time. "Because the world should not be a place where people die alone on a road," she said. "My mother did. I cannot change that, but I can change this." They rested for the remainder of the day in the shadow of the shed, gathering strength from the drip of water. As the sun began to set again, painting the sky in fire, he spoke. His voice was different, stronger, clear. "My name is Charles," he said. "Charles Mbeki. I was on my way to inspect a site. My car broke down. My driver, he went for help and never came back. I think he saw his chance to steal what was in the car and left me." He paused, the next words heavy with a new weight. Amara, you need to understand. The company I own, it builds hospitals all across this region, and the nearest one to us right now is the one I was going to see. It's in Denver. The revelation hung between them. The destination she was dragging him toward, through hell, was his own unfinished building, a place that could save him, but only if they reached it. He grabbed her hand, his grip urgent. We have to get there, not just for me. If we don't, if I die out here, the project fails. The clinic dies with me. Hundreds of people, thousands, will have nothing. Do you understand? Amara understood. The weight on her small shoulders was no longer just one man's life. It was the future of an entire region. The 30-mile walk had just become a race against a much larger clock. And as they prepared to leave the outpost, under the cover of twilight, a new sound joined the chorus of the wild. Not dogs, not the wind, the distant, growing roar of a desert storm, a wall of dust and wind that would erase the path, blind even those who could see, and bury anyone caught in its path. It was coming straight for them. The storm wasn't just weather, it was a beast. They heard it before they saw it, a deep, grinding roar like the earth itself was tearing apart. The wind hit first, a hot, gritty slap that stole their breath. Charles shouted, but his words were ripped away. In an instant, the world vanished into a swirling, choking wall of orange dust. Amara reacted not with sight, but with survival. She dropped to the ground, pulling Charles down with her. Get low, cover your mouth, she yelled into his ear. The sand scoured every exposed inch of skin. It filled their ears, their noses, the folds of their clothes. For a sighted person, it was blindness. For Amara, it was sensory overload, a screaming, howling chaos that drowned out every navigational sound she relied on. They huddled against the metal shed, the only solid thing in the maelstrom. Minutes felt like hours. Charles pressed his face into the crook of his arm, coughing. Amara clutched his shirt, a physical tether to prevent them from being separated by 3 feet of nothingness. In the eye of that howling madness, a strange reversal occurred. Charles, the powerful man used to commanding continents, was utterly helpless, disoriented by the loss of sight. Amara, who had never had it, was the calm center. She counted breaths. She listened for shifts in the wind's pitch. She waited. The storm's fury passed in 20 minutes, leaving behind an eerie, dust-hazed twilight and a landscape erased and redrawn. Dunes had formed where the path was. Landmarks were buried. Charles stared, despair returning. We are lost. The road, it's gone. Amara stood up slowly, shaking the sand from her hair. She turned her head slowly, listening. The world was silent, muffled under a blanket of dust. But then a sound, faint. The trickle of water from the pump's drip, now a soft patter as sand cleared from the pipe. She oriented herself towards it. Then another sound, a single lonely creak, the wind catching the shed's loose tin roof. These were her coordinates. We are not lost, she said. The pump is there, the shed is here. The road, she pointed with unerring accuracy away from the sounds, is that way, under the sand, but it is there. Charles looked from her to the featureless wasteland. How can you know that? Because the storm came from the east, she said simply. It pushed the sand in one direction. The shapes of the dunes, I can hear them. She wasn't referring to sound, but to the way the wind flowed over the new contours, creating subtle sonic textures he could never perceive. Her world, rebuilt from echoes. They set off, Amara reading the fresh dunes like braille under her feet. The walking was harder, the sand sucking at their steps, but they were moving, and with every grueling mile Charles talked. He talked to stay awake, to distract from the pain. He told her about the Mbeki group. He started it not from family wealth, but from a single construction truck. He built roads, then schools, then clinics. The Denver Hospital was to be his flagship, a fully equipped, modern facility to serve an entire district of forgotten villages. Villages like hers. Why there? Amara asked. Why Denver? It is still in the middle of nothing. Because the middle of nothing is where people are left to die, Charles said, his voice rough. My sister died in a place like this, fever, 2 days from a real doctor. He was silent for a few steps. I made a promise. I build where the governments and the big charities don't bother to look. The revelation changed him in her mind. He was not just a rich man. He was a man building monuments to a specific, personal grief. The hospital was not just a business project. It was a tombstone and a promise. By the next afternoon, they saw it. First, a smudge on the horizon Charles thought was a mirage. Then, the glint of sunlight on solar panels, a cluster of low, white buildings, startlingly clean against the dusty earth. Denver, and at its edge, the skeleton of something larger, steel beams rising against the sky. The hospital. A new energy surged through them. They stumbled forward, their exhaustion forgotten. As they neared the town's outskirts, people began to notice. Children stopped playing. Women looked up from their washing. They saw a disheveled, sunburned foreigner being led by a blind village girl in a torn dress. A murmur followed them. They went straight to the half-built hospital site. A foreman in a hard hat stood over blueprints, shouting at a worker. Charles walked up to him. "I need to see the site manager, now." The foreman looked him up and down, taking in the ripped, dirty clothes. "Who are you?" "Charles Emberkey." The man laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Right, and I'm the president. Get lost. We're busy." Charles's posture shifted. The weakness fell away, replaced by a terrifying, quiet authority. "Your name is Joseph Cohn," Charles said, his eyes locking onto the man. "You were hired 6 months ago from the Kinshasa project. You have a wife named Fanta, and you're building a house in Bamako. You are 38 minutes behind today's pouring schedule because your cement mixer broke down at 7:15 this morning." The foreman's mouth hung open, the color drained from his face. "Mr. Emberkey. Get the site manager and fetch water and a first aid kit." The command was quiet, absolute. Within minutes, the site was in controlled chaos. Charles Emberkey was alive. He was here. The project manager, a harried-looking woman named Ada, rushed out. She took one look at him and at Amara, whose feet were now visibly swollen and bleeding, and snapped into action. They were taken to the site office, a portable cabin with air conditioning that felt like heaven. A doctor from the town's existing, tiny clinic was summoned. He cleaned and bandaged Amara's feet, gave her rehydration salts, and checked Charles for heat stroke and organ damage. "You are both severely dehydrated, malnourished, and exhausted. You need proper hospital care," the doctor said. "We're in a hospital," Charles said, gesturing to the beams outside the window. "That's a construction site. The nearest real facility is a 9-hour drive." Charles looked at Ada. "How long to make this place operational? Not finished. Operational, 1 ward, 1 surgery." Ada balked. "Mr. Emberkey, with all respect, you've been missing for days. The board is in an uproar. The funds are frozen. We're on a skeleton crew just securing the site." "What board?" Charles asked, his voice dangerously calm. "The interim board," Ada said, hesitant. "When you were declared missing, presumed, they invoked the emergency succession clause. Mr. Traore is acting CEO." The name hit Charles like a physical blow. Samuel Traore, his chief financial officer, his most trusted advisor, the man who had personally recommended this remote site for the flagship hospital. The pieces, jagged and terrible, began to click into place. The car didn't just break down. His driver didn't just run away. He was led here to the middle of nowhere and stranded. This wasn't an accident. It was a carefully staged disappearance. Charles leaned back, closing his eyes. When he opened them, they were focused and cold. "Ada, listen to me very carefully. My life depends on this hospital being built, and now it seems my company does too. You have 48 hours. Use every favor, every local worker, bully, beg, or bribe every supplier within 200 miles. I want a functional medical ward here, not a construction site, a hospital." He turned to Amara, who was sitting quietly, drinking her water. "And she stays with me. She is under my personal protection." The order was given. The machine, frozen by doubt and corporate intrigue, shuddered and began to move, fueled by one man's will to survive and reclaim what was his. News of Charles Emberkey's miraculous arrival spread through the town, then via crackling radio signals to the capital. By nightfall, the first trickle of curious locals gathered at the fence, watching cranes that had been still for weeks suddenly swing to life under portable floodlights. But in a plush office 1,000 miles away, a man named Samuel Traore received a very different phone call. The report was simple: Emberkey was alive. He was at the Denver site, and he was not alone. He had a blind girl with him, a girl from the bush who was being treated like a dignitary. Traore ended the call. He poured a drink, his hands steady. The plan had failed. The silent, distant death in the desert had not happened. Now his rival was not just alive, he was a story with a helpless, heroic child at the center, a narrative poison to Traor's corporate takeover. He made another call, this one was local. The girl, he said, find out everything about her. Who is she? What does she want? If Mbeki has made her his symbol, she is now the key. He paused. And prepare the papers for the board meeting. We need to discredit his judgment. A man who drags a blind peasant into a corporate crisis is unstable, a liability. The battle lines were no longer in the desert. They were drawn on spreadsheets and in boardrooms and in the perception of a powerless girl who had only wanted to save a life. Charles knew the corporate wolves would be circling. He knew Traor would move to cut off his authority, his funds, his very identity. But he had one asset Traor didn't understand: Amara. The next morning, Charles did something that stunned his skeleton crew. He asked Amara to walk the site with him. He described the layout, the future emergency wing here, the maternity ward there, the surgical suite. He asked her what she heard. She listened to the echoes of hammers, the shout of foremen, the grind of generators. It sounds busy, she said, but it sounds like it is all in one place. The sick people, the noise, the machines, they will all be together. The scared and the hurting will hear only the noise of building. Charles was silent. He had designed for efficiency, for flow, not for peace, not for healing. What would you do? He asked. She thought for a long moment. In my village, the sick are kept away from the noise, under the big tree at the quiet end. The medicine is not just in the bottle. It is in the quiet to hear your own heart get better. It was a simple, profound insight from a world of different senses. That afternoon, Charles ordered a redesign on the fly. He created a separate, insulated wing for recovery, oriented away from the industrial noise. He ordered gardens be planned, not for show, but for sound, water features, and rustling plants to mask the hard noises of the town. The local workers, who had viewed the project as another foreign imposition, saw this. They saw the big boss, back from the dead, listening to a blind village girl, and not just listening, changing his multi-million-dollar plans based on her words. A rumor began, soft but potent. The blind girl sees the truth. The boss hears her. This was the narrative that reached Samuel Traor, and it confirmed his worst fear. Mbeki wasn't just recovering, he was crafting a legend that would make him untouchable. Traor's next move had to be decisive. He couldn't kill Mbeki now, too much attention, but he could cut the heart out of his story. 2 days later, a sleek black car kicked up dust on the road to Denver. It did not go to the hospital site. It went to the local magistrate's office. Inside, a lawyer from the capital presented carefully prepared documents. They were adoption papers and a generous, no-strings-attached donation to the town's existing clinic. The lawyer made a compelling, quiet argument to the magistrate. A vulnerable, blind minor was being exploited by a traumatized billionaire in the middle of a high-stakes corporate battle. Was it right? Was it safe? The state had a duty of care. Perhaps it was better if the girl was placed in proper custody, far from this mess, in a special school in the city where she could be cared for. It was, the lawyer stressed, for her own good. The magistrate, impressed by the paperwork and the promise of clinic funds, agreed. He signed a temporary order. The lawyer left the office, a thin smile on his face. The story of the blind savior was about to be rewritten as a tale of rescue, not by Amara, but from Charles Mbeki himself. The papers arrived at the site office just after dawn, delivered by a nervous police officer who couldn't meet Charles's eyes. Temporary guardianship order. Minor, Amara Keita, removed from the care of Charles Mbeki due to concerns of exploitation and unsafe conditions. Effective immediately. Charles read the document, his face a stone. He looked at the officer. Who signed this? The magistrate, sir. It's legal. Legal, Charles repeated. He knew this move. It was cleaner than a bullet, more damning than a lawsuit. Take the heart of the story and call it protection. He walked to the window where Amara was sitting outside, listening to the morning sounds of the site. She had a new dress, simple but clean, and her feet were bandaged. She looked peaceful. We have to go, Charles said to her quietly. Now. He didn't explain, He helped her up and guided her to his sight vehicle, a rugged 4x4. The police officer protested. "Sir, you can't, the order. Tell your magistrate I will be contesting this in person. And tell the man who paid for that stamp," Charles said, his voice low, "that he has just made the worst mistake of his life." He drove off, kicking up dust, heading not away from town, but directly into its heart. He went to the magistrate's compound, a modest house with a faded flag. Charles walked in, Amara's hand on his arm, and placed the order on the man's breakfast table. "Explain this." The magistrate, an older man named Diallo, wiped his mouth. "It is for her safety, Mr. Mbeki. You are in a crisis, a corporate war, I am told. This child should not be a pawn." "She is not a pawn. She saved my life. And now she is a symbol. Symbols get broken. A special school in the capital, a generous donation to our clinic here. It is a better path for her." Charles understood the transaction. Traore had bought the law. He leaned forward. "You have taken a bribe to kidnap a child. Do you know who I am?" "I know you are a man who might not be in charge of anything by next week," Diallo said, a flicker of fear behind his eyes. "The papers from the city say your company is changing hands. The new management made a very reasonable offer." So Traore was moving fast, freezing assets, seizing control, and now removing the human obstacle to his narrative. Charles had no time for legal battles. He needed a different weapon: public opinion. He took Amara to the town's small radio station, a single-room building with a transmitter that reached the surrounding villages. He gave the host, a young man with eager eyes, a simple offer: an interview with the girl who walked 30 miles to save the billionaire. The host, smelling the story of a lifetime, agreed instantly. On air, Charles said little. He let Amara speak. The host asked her, in their local language, what happened on the road. Her voice, soft and clear, filled the crackling airwaves. She described the heat, the sound of his pain, the feel of the sand in the storm. She described her fear not of the distance, but of failing. She spoke of her mother dying without a doctor. She did not mention Traore or corporate battles or custody papers. She spoke of a simple fact: a man needed help, and she helped. Then the host asked, "And now they say you must go to a school in the city, away from here. What do you say to that?" Amara was silent for a long moment. "If I go," she said slowly, "who will remind Mr. Charles that sick people need quiet to heal? Who will remind him that the hospital is not for his name, but for my mother, who died without one? My eyes are broken, but my memory is not. I remember the way. I remember why." It was a devastating, perfect answer. It framed the custody order not as protection, but as a silencing. Within the hour, the station's phone was ringing. Calls came from other villages. The story, in her own voice, began to spread like grassfire. But Traore was listening too, and his response was not emotional, it was surgical. An hour after the broadcast, Charles's satellite phone rang. It was his own executive assistant, her voice trembling. "Sir, the board has convened an emergency meeting. Today, they are voting on a motion of no confidence. They cite mental instability and reckless endangerment of a minor. The news of the custody order, they're using it as proof." Charles's entire world was contracting. Traore was attacking on every front, legally, corporately, narratively. Charles was losing his company, his freedom to protect Amara, and soon, his very reputation. He needed leverage, hard, undeniable leverage. He realized he had been thinking like a businessman defending his property. He needed to think like a man who had been left to die in the desert. He needed to find out why. He called the only person in his company he still trusted, his head of security, Kojo. "Kojo, I need you to look into something. My vehicle that broke down, the driver who disappeared, and pull every financial trail for Samuel Traore for the last 18 months. Look for anything connected to Demba, to vehicle suppliers, to security firms out here." While Kojo dug, Charles faced the next wave. A delegation from the capital arrived, 2 stern-faced women from the Social Services Ministry, accompanied by a uniformed officer. They came to the radio station, where Charles and Amara had stayed, surrounded by a growing, murmuring crowd of locals who had heard the broadcast. "The girl comes with us," the lead social worker said, her voice firm. This is no longer a town matter. It is a ministerial order. Charles stood in front of Amara. On what grounds? On the grounds that she is an unaccompanied minor in a conflict zone, being used for media propaganda. We are placing her in protective custody until her family situation can be verified and a safe, permanent placement arranged. The crowd stirred. A voice shouted from the back, "She is safe here." Others joined in. The social worker looked nervous but held her ground. The police officer stepped forward. It was Amara who diffused it. She stood, her hand finding Charles's arm. "I will go," she said quietly. Charles looked at her, horrified. "Amara, no. If I do not go, they will take you, or there will be a fight, and the hospital stops," she said, her voice heartbreakingly pragmatic. "The hospital is more important than where I sleep tonight." She was right, and the truth of it gutted him. She had saved his life only to become a target in a war she never chose. He knelt before her, ignoring the officials. "I will get you back, I promise you." She nodded. "I know, but while I am gone, you must build the hospital, not for you, for them." She gestured towards the crowd. They took her. The crowd parted silently, a few women weeping. Charles watched the official car drive away, a cold fury solidifying in his chest. This was no longer business. This was personal. Kojo called back an hour later, his voice tense. "Charles, you were right. It wasn't an accident. Your vehicle was sabotaged. The fuel line was deliberately cut in a way that would cause a slow leak, leading to engine failure in a specific remote area. The driver was paid. A deposit was made to an account linked to his brother from a shell company. I'm still tracing it, but the pattern, it leads back to discretionary funds approved by Traor's office." Then Kojo delivered the second blow. "And the board vote is in 2 hours. The numbers are against you. Traor has the majority. He's been promising a pivot, less charity building, more lucrative government infrastructure contracts in the capital. He's telling them you've lost focus, that you're emotionally compromised." Charles was silent, looking at the half-built hospital. Traor hadn't just wanted him dead. He wanted his legacy dead. The hospitals, the schools, the unprofitable humanitarian heart of the company were to be scrapped. Demba was to be the first and last of its kind. He had one card left to play, and it was a dangerous one. He called the radio host. "I need the air again, now, and I need you to patch the broadcast to every station in the capital that will take it." "What are you going to do?" the host asked. "I'm going to resign," Charles said. He went on air live, his voice weary but clear. He addressed his employees, the board, and the public. "I have been informed of the board's motion. To save the company I built from further conflict, I am stepping down as CEO, effective immediately." In a plush office, Samuel Traor allowed himself a smile, watching on a live financial news feed. He had won. But Charles wasn't finished. "I am stepping down," he continued, "to focus entirely on 2 things. First, on proving that my trusted colleague, Samuel Traor, attempted to have me murdered in the desert to seize control of the company." The smile vanished from Traor's face. "And second," Charles said, his voice gaining strength, "on building this hospital in Demba with my own hands if I have to. I am no longer your CEO. I am just a man who owes his life to a brave girl and to the people of this region who have been promised a future. The Mbeki group may abandon you. I will not." He then made an appeal. "To every engineer, every nurse, every builder who believes in what we started, come to Demba, work for free if you must. I will match your pay from my personal funds for as long as I have them. This hospital will be built, not by a corporation, by people." It was a nuclear option. He had just set his own company on fire and invited people to jump into the blaze with him. He cut the transmission. The fallout was instantaneous. The board, now facing a massive public scandal involving attempted murder, panicked. Traor went into damage control, issuing furious denials, but the seed was planted. News outlets, previously focused on the corporate drama, now had a far juicier story: Billionaire alleges murder plot by former friend. And people began to come, not a flood but a trickle. A nurse from a nearby town showed up that evening, then 2 local builders who had worked on the site, A doctor from the capital emailed, offering 2 weeks of his time. The skeleton crew, inspired, redoubled their efforts. But Charles's victory was fragile. He was now CEO of nothing, burning his personal fortune to pay wages, with a legal battle ahead and Amara in custody. That night, as he surveyed the site under generator lights, Kojo called again. "I found the link, Charles, the shell company that paid your driver. It's owned by another company, which is majority owned by a foreign construction firm. A firm that just signed a massive, exclusive contract with the Mbeki Group, a contract signed by Samuel Traore yesterday. The contract is for a highway. It runs right through this district. And the projected route," Kojo paused, "it goes straight through where this hospital is standing." Charles understood finally. It wasn't just about killing him or seizing the company. It was about the land. The hospital site was in the way of a lucrative government highway contract. Traore needed the hospital project and its idealistic founder to disappear. A dead founder and a cancelled charity project would clear the way for millions in profit. Amara wasn't just a narrative obstacle. Her entire village, this region, was a physical obstacle. The hospital was a land grab. This changed everything. This wasn't corporate rivalry. This was a conspiracy to steal land and erase a community. And Amara was in government custody, silenced, while the paperwork to seize the land could be fast-tracked. Charles had the truth, but truth alone wouldn't win. He needed Amara back. He needed her voice, her story, to make the world see this not as a business dispute, but as an injustice. He looked at the busy site, at the people who had come to help. He had an army of sorts, but no way to storm the ministry office in the capital. Then he had an idea, a simple, reckless idea. If the law was bought and the corporation was stolen, he would appeal to a higher authority, the court of public opinion worldwide. He would show them, not tell them. He would finish the hospital. And he would do it in plain sight, with the whole world watching, while the girl who inspired it was held captive. The contrast would be undeniable. He called a journalist he knew, one from an international news agency. He told her everything. The sabotage, the land grab, the custody order. "Come to Denver," he said, "see for yourself." The stage was set for the final act. Charles Mbeki, stripped of his title and his resources, was betting everything on a single audacious move, to build a monument to kindness so visible, so powerful, that it would shatter the walls of greed holding an innocent girl hostage. The race was no longer against the desert or heatstroke. It was against time, against Traore's paperwork, and against the silent machinery of corruption that was already moving to bury the truth under tons of concrete. The international journalist arrived 3 days later. Her name was Lena, and she brought a camera operator and a healthy dose of skepticism. She expected to find a wealthy man staging a publicity stunt. What she found was a fever dream of determined labor, a half-built hospital rising from dust, and a man who looked more like a weary foreman than a billionaire. Charles met her covered in concrete dust. He didn't give a press conference. He handed her a hard hat and said, "Walk with me, see for yourself." He showed her everything. The sabotaged vehicle, now towed to the site as evidence. The financial records Kojo had uncovered, linking Traore to the land deal. The sworn affidavits from the site workers about the rushed, mysterious orders in the days after Charles's disappearance. And he showed her Amara's empty chair by the site office window. Lena interviewed the volunteers, the nurse who traveled for hours, the builders working for half pay. She spoke to the townspeople, who told her about the radio broadcast and the social workers taking the girl. She saw the quiet wing Charles had redesigned on Amara's suggestion. The story wrote itself. It wasn't about a billionaire's gratitude. It was about a community fighting to protect a sliver of hope from being paved over for profit. Her report aired 48 hours later. It was a 10-minute segment that didn't just present allegations, it wove a narrative. It opened with Amara's voice from the radio, then cut to the stark contrast of Charles working under the sun, then to the complicated corporate charts linking Traore to the foreign construction firm. It ended with a simple, powerful question: who is really being protected here? The effect was electric. The story went international. Outrage is a currency, and this story minted it in abundance. Protests erupted outside the Mbeki Group headquarters in the capital. Hashtags trended. Donations, small and large, began pouring into a fund Charles's lawyer set up for the hospital. More importantly, the Minister of Health, facing a public relations nightmare, announced an inquiry into the guardianship order. Under the blinding glare of the spotlight, the machinery of corruption began to seize up. The Social Services Ministry, suddenly eager to appear compassionate, announced Amara would be returned to her village while a full and fair review was conducted. They did not bring her back. They released her at a regional office, expecting her uncle to collect her. Charles was waiting instead. He drove through the night. When Amara stepped out of the government building, guided by a hesitant clerk, he was there. She heard his footsteps and turned. "You came," she said, no surprise in her voice. "I promised," he replied. The reunion was quiet, but it was filmed on a dozen phone cameras. The image of the weary, dusty man kneeling to hug the blind girl in her simple dress became the defining photo of the entire saga. It was raw, real, and utterly disarming. The narrative Traore had tried to build, of instability and exploitation, shattered in that single frame. With Amara back at the site, the work took on a new, celebratory energy. She became its quiet conscience, moving through the wards, her hands brushing over finished walls, listening to the sounds of construction now tempered with the sounds of planting in the new garden. The hospital was no longer just a building. It was a testament. But Samuel Traore was not finished. With the land grab exposed and public sentiment toxic, he made his final, desperate move. He used his remaining influence on the board to have the Mbeki Group file an injunction against Charles. The claim: Charles was using stolen company intellectual property, the original hospital blueprints, to build a competing facility. The lawsuit demanded work cease immediately and the nearly completed structure be turned over to the corporation. It was a masterful legal ambush. Even if Charles eventually won, the injunction could freeze construction for months or years, bleeding his personal funds dry and letting the project die from delay. The papers were served at the site as the team was painting the final ward. Charles was defeated. He had fought the desert, corruption, and slander, but the cold, precise language of a corporate injunction was a wall he could not climb. He sat with Amara that evening, watching the sunset paint the white walls gold. "I am sorry," he said, his voice thick. "I thought we could outwork them, but they have laws we cannot break." Amara was quiet for a long time. "The hospital is not the building," she said finally. "You told me that. It is the people inside it. The care, that is the idea. Can they own an idea?" Her question echoed in his mind. The blueprints were company property, but the idea, the mission, that was his. It was hers. It belonged to every person who had volunteered. The next morning, he made a decision that stunned his lawyer. He would not fight the injunction on their terms. He would surrender. He called a press conference at the site. In front of the gathered volunteers and media, he made an announcement. "The Mbeki Group claims this building, so let them have it. We will not paint another wall. We will not lay another brick." A murmur of confusion and anger rippled through the crowd. Had he given up? But Charles continued, "They do not own the oath we took to heal. They do not own our hands or our knowledge or our will." He then unveiled a new plan, drawn up in secret with the local doctor and nurse. A mobile clinic, a fleet of rugged vehicles outfitted as fully equipped medical units, capable of reaching the remote villages the fixed hospital was meant to serve. It would be faster, more flexible, and utterly immune to Traore's land-based legal attack. "We will build it in workshops across the region. We will staff it with those who still believe in the mission. The Demba Hospital will stand as an empty monument to greed, but the Demba mission will roll into every village that needs it." The move was a brilliant end run. It turned Traore's victory into a hollow one. He would get an empty shell of a building, while Charles would launch the actual medical service. The public, already on Charles's side, adored the clever defiance. Donations for the mobile clinic fleet flooded in twice as fast. Faced with the prospect of owning a white elephant while being vilified as the man who stole a hospital from the sick, the board of the Mbeki Group revolted. Major investors, fearing permanent brand damage, demanded Traore's immediate resignation. The injunction was withdrawn before the ink was dry. The board, desperate for redemption, offered to donate the completed Demba Hospital to an independent foundation if Charles would simply endorse the company again. Charles agreed on one condition. He would not return as CEO. He would take a role as chairman of a new, transparent charitable trust to oversee all the company's humanitarian projects. And Samuel Traore would be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The board, eager to be rid of the scandal, agreed. Traore was arrested 2 weeks later on charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, and corruption. The evidence Kojo and the journalist had compiled was overwhelming. On a bright, clear morning, the Demba Regional Hospital opened its doors, not as a corporate asset, but as a community trust. The opening ceremony was packed. People came from villages 50 miles away. Charles stood at the microphone, but he did not speak long. He told the story of a girl, a road, and a promise. Then he turned the microphone over to Amara. She stood before the crowd, her head held high. "I do not see this beautiful building," she said, "but I hear the quiet in the recovery wing. I smell the clean sheets. I hear the hope in your voices. This is not his hospital. It is not my hospital. It is yours. Use it well." Then Charles did the thing that would be remembered forever. He asked her to stay, not as a guest, not as an inspiration. "Amara," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "you have the sharpest ears and the strongest heart I have ever known. You saw what this place needed before I did. I can think of no one better to lead the community council that will guide this hospital. Will you help us listen to the people we serve?" It was an offer that transcended charity. It was an offer of partnership, of respect, of shared authority. Amara, after a moment of stunned silence, nodded. "Yes," she said, "I will." The final, surprising detail came months later, in the form of a simple legal document. Charles Mbeki, using a portion of his reclaimed personal wealth, established a full scholarship in Amara's name. But it wasn't for her. It was for her to award. Every year, she would select a young person from a remote village, with or without sight, who showed courage and compassion to receive a full education anywhere in the world. The first recipient was a boy from her own village who had cared for his younger siblings after their parents died. The cycle of kindness formalized. The story had reached its end. The rescue was complete. The betrayer was vanquished. The hospital was built. But as Charles watched Amara walking the hospital gardens, her hand lightly touching the leaves of a medicinal herb plant, he knew the real story was just beginning. It was the story of a quiet voice that would now help steer the future of an entire region. A voice that had first found him in the dust and led him, step by step, not just to safety, but to a better version of himself. The 30-mile journey was over. The lifelong one was just starting. So what does this story leave us with? Not just a tale of rescue, but a map of two worlds colliding. The world of power, sight, and ambition, and the world of resonance, touch, and quiet conviction. Amara heard a cry everyone else was too busy, too distant, or too focused on their own path to notice. In a landscape defined by absence, the absence of doctors, of roads, of hope, she recognized the one absence that mattered most, the absence of someone willing to act. Charles Mbeki entered the desert as a king of concrete and steel. He left it as a student of a different kind of architecture, the architecture of human connection. The hospital stands not as a trophy of his wealth, but as a monument to a simple, devastating truth she taught him, that the most profound vision sometimes requires closing your eyes. That real power isn't in what you can take, but in what you are willing to hear. We live in a loud world, a world that prizes visibility, spectacle, and the relentless forward march. This story asks us to consider the strength found in a different kind of perception, in listening, in the courage to step off your own path and onto someone else's, even when you cannot see where it leads. Amara's blindness wasn't a limitation in that desert. It was the very filter that allowed her to detect a life in need through the noise of indifference. The corporate battle, the betrayal, the legal fights, those were the echoes of a broken system. But at the center, quiet and unshakable, was a choice to connect one human being to another. That choice built more than a hospital. It rebuilt a man. It charted a future for a region. It proved that the most complex problems of greed and corruption can be unraveled by the simplest thread, unwavering kindness. So now I turn the question to you. Right now, as you watch this, where are you? What does your world sound like? And if you listen past the noise of your own life, what might you hear? A cry for help doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's a whisper on a dusty road. Sometimes it's the silent struggle of the person next to you. The question isn't whether you have the resources to change everything. it's whether you have the will to change one thing. Amara had nothing but a water gourd and a memory of loss. That was enough to start a chain reaction that changed countless lives. Your moment might not be 30 miles under a scorching sun, it might be 30 seconds of attention, a single act of reaching out. That's where every revolution of the human spirit begins. If this story reminded you that the world can be reshaped by compassion, then do something simple. Share it. Talk about it. Let's amplify stories where humanity wins. And if you want to see more tales that challenge what we think is possible, tap that subscribe button. Because in a world that often feels dark, sometimes we all need a reminder of how brightly a single act of courage can shine.